Welcome to Obsessed with Assessment podcast, the show where we dive deep into the cool blue waters of all things assessment related. Paul has been tackling reams of research to bring you the gold in this episode, and we'll get to that shortly. First, some introductions. My name's Sam Deno. 14 years. Paul, that's how long it is that I've been in this education industry game.
It's a long
Can
time.
You believe it? I don't look a day over 25.
Absolutely.
That is 6 years in the classroom and 8 years in EdTech. Paul, what about yourself?
12 years of teaching and coming up into my second year of EdTech. So yeah, working through all the sort of different ranks of education and really getting to grips with assessment and enjoying kind of learning a bit more about assessment here through our podcast with you, Sam. So should we hear our theme tune?
Let me tell you about how the podcast works. Every episode we explore a new aspect of assessment. We look at articles, blogs, educational texts, academic writing, reports, anything that we can find that will give us more information about how the world of assessment works, and then we deep dive into it, ending with a key takeaway that you can run with in your practice or otherwise, just a bit of interest. Paul, what have you been looking at today, please?
Well, today I've been feeling very mindful, and I thought I would open today's theme with a question taken from the chorus of a particularly poignant song, released all the way back in '93 by 4 Non Blondes, which says, "Hey, what's going on?" And it was stuck in my head, and I thought, it's a great question to ask about the world of education and mental health, which is what I've been looking at this week. So, I found out that people's mental health and well-being is increasingly understood to be one of the most prominent predictors of children's academic attainment. However, our Chartered College of Teaching have said actually the mental health of children appears to just be worsening over time, with more and more children experiencing clinically impairing anxiety and depression than we've ever seen in the classroom before. And the research is actually seeming to suggest that if we promote the well-being of pupils, actually it's in that space that we've got the most potential to improve educational outcomes.
So there's obviously been a long development of mental health reporting, Paul, but it feels like 2020 definitely created a bit of a line in the sand for how we talk about it in education and beyond, with obviously with the COVID pandemic and all.
Absolutely. Certainly COVID was a challenging time, and I think we've had more recent studies. So there's one that's been done in 2023 by the NHS, which has actually showed that there is this continuing trend of increase in anxiety in these mental health issues, which have gone from only 1 in 9 children experiencing these difficulties in 2017 through to 1 in 5 in every classroom experiencing them as of 2023. So as we can see, this has become quite a serious point for schools to take on board at the moment.
Go on, Paul. What is the solution apparently to all of this?
Well, at this point, enter mindfulness. Mindfulness programs seem to have grown exponentially in the education sector across the past decade or more. So I thought it was really important that I kind of look into this and where it all began, because certainly in my teaching I would quite happily take on board mindfulness tools, programs, colouring sheets, roll with it without perhaps thinking about it. So that's why I thought it would be quite interesting for some of our listeners perhaps who've been in the same position as me to find out a little bit more today.
It has become a bit of a buzzword, hasn't
Definitely.
it? Mindfulness, and I think there is a tendency to conflate sort of mindfulness with well-being. Those two sort of terms we just kind of bunch together in sort of fairly random fashion.
Absolutely, it seems to be that, doesn't it? As I say, I think a lot of our listeners perhaps have come across that in their own schools. So I think it's good for us to kind of figure out what it is, where it's come from, and how we can be applying this. So it seems to be steeped in this rich religious tradition that's come from Hindu Dharma and from Buddhist practices, And current thoughts have come out of these ancient texts and practices of meditation with this whole goal of just being mindful and just being fully present and being aware of your feelings and the surroundings, but without any judgment. Because I think all too much in schools, particularly for teachers, students, and in many walks of life, we are just so busy with the doing. And the emergence of mindfulness in schools seems to have come about off the back of a lot of work by John Kabat-Zinn, who was a professor of medicine at the University of Massachusetts, where he has founded this world-renowned mindfulness-based stress reduction centre. And that was all the way back in the 70s. And so his work has progressively made its way into the education world. And since the sort of mid to late 2000s, our schools have begun absorbing this idea. Which actually some commentators have sort of criticised because it's become this commercial thing from what really started off as a bit of a spiritual practice. I think I mentioned to Sam this week actually, I think even our toy companies are picking up on it now, and even Barbie is offering a mindfulness Barbie doll. So we've come a long way from a spiritual practice now to something that has become commercial.
What even does a Barbie mindfulness doll do?
I don't actually know. It's something I will have to look into, and something I'm sure that my 7-year-old daughter will be very elated if we look into it, if we buy one.
So the question is then, does mindfulness offer the silver bullet that the world of education is looking for in terms of addressing young people's mental health?
That's a really good question. I think certainly from all the reading that I've done this week, and as you've seen, that's a lot of reading, there seems to be this growing pool of research evidence which is suggesting that it can have these positive impacts, including strengthening brain areas that relate to attention, cognition and learning, which obviously for schools is a great thing. If we can use mindfulness to help children to build those learning capabilities, then that should have a positive impact on their attainment. Just circling back to the idea of commercialisation, there have been some researchers who have rightly questioned its use in sort of, these mindfulness products, things like colouring books, which have become quite associated with, mindfulness in schools. And actually their argument is mindfulness isn't an activity of doing, because inherently the idea is it's an idea of being and being aware. So actually they suggest that mindfulness should be this guided practice, or rather this kind of training in mindset or discipline of being present and fully aware. So, is offering a mindfulness colouring activity on its own likely to boost the resilience of children or their attainment, or indeed lead them to make kind of leaps and bounds in their learning? Well, possibly if you're just handing out these tools without any guidance around them, then it would seem unlikely that that's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking that. So no, actually, not necessarily. Mindfulness colouring is not going to be the answer to all of our problems. But I suppose it might hit some sort of a target in terms of improving general well-being for young people in the school.
Definitely.
I was going to say earlier, actually, Paul, but didn't jump in time. There is a sort of cynical side to this, isn't there? Because actually, what schools are seem to be saying, and maybe I'm wrong in making this assumption, but what we seem to be going towards is mindfulness as a means to an end, that actually it's all about improving learning outcomes for students, as opposed to sort of well-being practices to improve well-being. Do you think that would be fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, schools have obviously got this duty to, provide for children's spiritual, moral and social, cultural outlook. So I suppose in that way, it could be seen as something that is improving those more personal skill side of things. But obviously it comes with that other side where actually we're seeing this as the golden ticket to improving children's progress, which then comes back to, in other episodes that you can catch online. We've mentioned that Ofsted have kind of put the challenge in for school to up the ante in terms of grades. So we've got these two facets to it, I think, which mindfulness is sort of being seen to fulfill. But actually, as we mentioned, even if it is this thing that's sort of trained and something that's very much guided, actually, even then it's not necessarily that all researchers say it's having a brilliant impact, because actually some students, and I know I've had this and some of our listeners will have done, found some non-positive experiences from it. Increased sort of agitation, confusion, fidgeting, feeling uncomfortable, or these kind of intrusive thoughts coming in. So actually, I think probably to summarise, there needs to be a lot more research around it, and certainly the Chartered College of Teaching have said this in 2020. More research is needed in this area, and they quite rightly say that any benefits of this programme or this way of thinking actually shouldn't be oversold at this point in time.
Yeah. So I had a brief look on the NHS website under mindfulness, and it does say this. It says, many people find mindfulness helpful, but it's not right for everyone. Some people find that it does not help them, or that it can make them feel worse. Which, again, it sounds like it's definitely the case that even these practices have to be differentiated along with the rest of the curriculum. Mindfulness doesn't work for everyone.
Absolutely, and I think perhaps that's the thought and the consideration and conversation that leaders need to be having. It's not as simple as picking up a mindfulness program, a mindfulness tool, and thinking we can plug this in and it's going to work for everybody. As you say, if NHS are saying this, if the Chartered College of Teaching is saying this, if a number of people are reporting that actually it doesn't work for everybody, then it needs to be quite well considered.
So how can we implement mindfulness in assessment? What's the key takeaway, if there is one here, Paul?
Well, it seems to be, there is this widespread agreement that actually it can be effective, and from what I've read, actually, it's most effective when it's used as a whole school approach. It's not just this add-on that sort of once a week we're doing something, or ad hoc we're doing something. It's linked into a whole school system, and not just limited to a specific time, lesson or group. And it should be part of the school value system, that actually children are given that time to be self-aware and reflective as learners. There's a brilliant author, his name's Lee Crockett. He's a co-author of the Mindful Assessment book, and actually he offers this slightly different approach to mindfulness in schools, where he suggests that actually as leaders, as teachers, as educators, we have the power to be mindful of the approaches that we're choosing to assess and guide our learners. And he makes some great suggestions, like using exercises for your assessment, such as discussions and journaling, and allowing the children to self-grade, which is helping our students then to be kind of mindful of their journey and taking ownership of their journey in education and in learning, and actually inviting them to be much more metacognitive and self-aware. So probably I'd say then, in summary, is mindfulness more than a colouring sheet? Yes, I think we've got to use it effectively. We've got to use it in a considered way to have that positive and powerful effect on our pupils, and have it as a kind of holistic approach.
Yeah. So do you think, would it be fair to say then that we're going back to formative assessment, and that in terms of implementation in schools, mindfulness is about the child being aware of their own understanding of a subject, and then using that awareness to develop it further as they go forward in their learning?
Definitely, and that brings me back to that lovely definition of assessment coming from Acid Air, to sort of sit beside and to guide, and that feels like this much more mindful approach. And I'd suggest that yes, in that case, formative assessment is a huge part of this, with the teacher just being mindful and guiding their students through the process of learning. But I think it's probably also about creating this culture of learning, which takes the emphasis off striving and doing to make progress, and actually helping our students to be aware of themselves and their own achievements along that journey.
Wow. Well, how very thoughtful of you, Paul.
Indeed.
That's
very mindful.
That's like a mindfulness link. Yeah.
It is, isn't it?
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. That sounded flippant. It wasn't intended as flippant. That's really interesting. Thank you so much for thank you so much for all of your research, and thanks for listening, everybody. Comments, add some comments below if you would like to, subscribe, do all the things, and we'll be back again at some point in the near future. Bye for now.
Bye for now.